Don't bother showing up. You'll ruin the memories. My sister messaged 3 days before the ceremony. Mom just liked the message. I took a deep breath, canceled the videographer I paid for, and transferred the honeymoon fund back to my account. They had no idea what was about to happen. I, 32M, stared at my phone screen for the third time, reading my sister's message over and over. The words burned themselves into my memory. Don't bother showing up. You'll ruin the memories. Below it, Mom's little thumbs-up reaction felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My sister's wedding was in 3 days. The wedding I'd been planning to film for free as my gift to her. The wedding I'd booked time off work for, bought a new suit for, and even secretly contributed $5,000 toward when she mentioned they were short on their honeymoon fund. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the video equipment I'd borrowed from work. The charging cables snaked across my coffee table like electronic veins. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a professional videographer who'd spent the last 6 months planning the perfect wedding film for someone who didn't want me there. The backstory was simple and painful. 3 months ago, I'd started dating someone my family disapproved of. Not because she was a bad person, but because she was different. She came from a working-class background, had tattoos, and worked as a bartender while studying to become a nurse. My family, especially my sister and mother, had made their feelings clear from day one. They'd made snide comments at family dinners, excluded her from conversations, and generally treated her like she didn't exist. Last week, things came to a head at what was supposed to be a pre-wedding family dinner. My girlfriend had tried to make conversation with my sister about the wedding plans, asking innocent questions about flowers and venues. My sister had responded with barely concealed disdain, suggesting that someone who worked in a bar wouldn't understand the sophistication they were going for. I defended my girlfriend, pointing out that she was putting herself through nursing school and working harder than anyone I knew. The argument escalated quickly. My sister accused me of bringing shame to the family by dating beneath my station. Mom sided with her immediately, as she always did. The dinner ended with my sister screaming that she wished I'd never been born, and me walking out with my girlfriend in tow. Now, staring at that message, I realized they'd made their choice. After 32 years of being the responsible son, the one who helped with every family crisis, who lent money without asking for it back, who dropped everything when they needed me, none of it mattered. I picked up my phone and called the videographer they'd hired as backup when they decided I wasn't good enough. The conversation was brief and professional. I explained that I was the bride's brother and that there had been a change in plans. I offered to buy out their contract for double their fee if they could step aside. Money talks, and within 10 minutes, they'd agreed to cancel. Next, I logged into my bank account. The $5,000 I'd transferred to my sister's honeymoon fund sat there in the transaction history. I initiated a reversal, claiming fraudulent activity on my account. It would take a few days to process, but the money would be pulled back just as they were trying to pay for their trip. But I wasn't done. I had something they didn't know about, something that would make this wedding memorable for all the wrong reasons. 6 months ago, my sister had confided in me during one of our better moments. She'd been drunk and emotional, admitting that she'd been having an affair with her maid of honor's husband for the past year. The maid of honor, her best friend since college, had no idea. My sister had sworn me to secrecy, and like the good brother I thought I was, I'd kept her secret. I still had the text messages she'd sent me that night, screenshots of her confessions, even photos she'd drunkenly sent of gifts her lover had bought her. I'd kept them not out of malice, but because I'd learned long ago to document important conversations with my family. They had a habit of rewriting history when it suited them. The plan formed in my mind with crystal clarity. I created a fake email account and spent the next hour crafting the perfect message. I attached screenshots of my sister's confessions, carefully editing out any identifying information about myself. The email was addressed to the maid of honor, scheduled to be sent at 8 a.m. on the wedding day. The message was simple. Someone who cared about her thought she deserved to know the truth before standing beside her best friend at the altar. I included enough detail to make it credible, but kept it anonymous enough to protect myself. But I wasn't finished. I had one more card to play. My sister worked for a small marketing firm, and her boss was incredibly strict about professional conduct. 6 months earlier, she'd used company resources to plan personal aspects of her wedding, printing invitations on company printers, using the company's graphic design software for personal projects, even having wedding planning calls during work hours. She'd bragged about it to me, thinking it was clever. I still had screenshots of her social media posts showing the professionally printed invitations and programs. A quick reverse image search confirmed they'd been created using her company's proprietary design templates. I crafted another anonymous email, this one to her boss, detailing the misuse of company resources with attached evidence. The wedding was on a Saturday, but I scheduled this email to arrive first thing Monday morning. I wanted her to have her wedding day, however it went, before dealing with the professional consequences. I spent the next 2 days in a strange state of calm. My girlfriend asked if I was okay, and I told her I was processing the situation in my own way. She understood. She'd seen how my family treated both of us, and she knew I needed to handle this without interference. Friday night, I received a panic call from my cousin. She'd been designated as my sister's point of contact for wedding logistics, and apparently, the videographer had just canceled. My sister was having a meltdown, unable to find a replacement on such short notice. My cousin asked if I knew any videographers who might be available last minute. I told her I was sorry to hear about the problem, but reminded her that I wasn't invited to the wedding, so I wouldn't be much help with vendor recommendations. The irony in my cousin's voice was palpable as she realized the situation. She'd been at that family dinner and had watched the whole argument unfold without saying a word. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for what was about to unfold. I imagined my sister getting ready, probably stressed about the missing videographer, but confident that her day would be perfect regardless. I pictured my mother helping with her dress, both of them probably making jokes about how much better the wedding would be without me there. At exactly 8 a.m., I received a notification that my scheduled email had been sent. I imagined the maid of honor, probably getting her hair done or having breakfast, checking her phone and finding a message that would change everything. I went about my Saturday normally. I had coffee, went for a run, did some freelance editing work. Around noon, my phone started buzzing with calls from family members. First my cousin, then my uncle, then various other relatives. I let them all go to voicemail. The first voicemail was from my cousin. Chaos at the wedding venue. The maid of honor had disappeared. My sister was hysterical. And did I know anything about some email that had been sent? The second was from my uncle, demanding to know if I had anything to do with whatever was happening at the wedding. The third was from my mother, her voice shaking with rage, telling me that if I had sabotaged my sister's wedding, I was dead to her. I deleted them all without fully listening. Around 3 p.m., when the ceremony should have been in full swing, I received a text from my girlfriend asking if I'd heard anything about my sister's wedding. Apparently, word was spreading on social media that something had gone wrong, but details were scarce. I told her I hadn't heard anything directly, which was technically true. That evening, my cousin called again. This time I answered, curious about the damage. She told me the whole story with barely contained excitement. The maid of honor had received an email that morning with evidence of my sister's affair with her husband. She'd confronted him immediately, and he'd confessed everything. Instead of quietly backing out, she'd driven to the wedding venue and caused a massive scene, screaming about betrayal and lies in front of all the guests. The ceremony had been called off. My sister had locked herself in the bridal suite, sobbing uncontrollably. The groom, apparently unaware of the affair, was trying to process what had happened while dealing with a venue full of confused guests and catered food that no one was eating. My cousin asked if I knew anything about the email. I told her it sounded like karma had finally caught up with my sister. She seemed to accept this explanation, probably because it aligned with her own sense of justice. Sunday was quieter. A few more family members called, but the initial panic had settled into damage control. I heard through the grapevine that my sister and the groom were trying to work things out, that they were planning to reschedule for a smaller, more intimate ceremony in a few weeks. I let them have their hope. Update 1. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a Swiss watch. At 9:15 a.m., I received a frantic call from my sister. For the first time in weeks, she was calling me directly, her voice barely recognizable through the tears and panic. She told me she'd been fired. Her boss had received an anonymous email with evidence of her misusing company resources for personal projects. They'd called her into the office first thing Monday morning and terminated her employment effective immediately. She was devastated, confused about how anyone could have known about her minor infractions, and desperately needed someone to talk to. The irony was suffocating. After telling me not to bother showing up because I'd ruin her memories, she was now calling me for emotional support in her crisis. I listened to her sob for a few minutes, then calmly explained that I was sorry she was going through a difficult time, but I wasn't sure I was the right person to help her process this situation. After all, she'd made it clear that my presence in her life was unwelcome and damaging. She tried to backtrack, claiming the wedding message had been sent in anger and didn't reflect her true feelings. She insisted that family was supposed to support each other through difficult times, regardless of past disagreements. I found it fascinating how quickly her perspective on family loyalty had changed when she was the one in need. I told her I'd think about it, and hung up. Update 2. The next few days were a masterclass in family drama. Word of my sister's firing had spread, and suddenly everyone had opinions about what had happened and who was responsible. Some family members began connecting the dots between my exclusion from the wedding and the subsequent disasters that had befallen my sister. My mother called Wednesday evening, her tone different from the rage-filled voicemail she'd left Saturday. She was probing, trying to determine if I knew more than I was letting on. She mentioned how strange it was that everything had gone wrong for my sister right after our family conflict. I told her that sometimes life has a way of revealing people's true character when they least expect it. I suggested that perhaps my sister's recent troubles were simply the natural consequences of her own choices catching up with her. Mom didn't like that response. Thursday brought news that my sister and her fiancé had officially called off the engagement. The affair revelation had been too much for him to process, especially coming on what was supposed to be their wedding day. He'd moved out of their shared apartment and was staying with friends while he figured out his next steps. My sister was facing the perfect storm. No job, no fiancé, no apartment she could afford on her own, and a social circle that was rapidly dividing into camps based on what they knew about her affair. Friday evening, I received an unexpected visitor. My mother stood at my apartment door, looking older than I'd ever seen her. She asked if we could talk, and despite my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my couch and told me she knew I was responsible for everything that had happened. She didn't have proof, but she knew me well enough to recognize my handiwork in the precise timing and devastating effectiveness of my sister's downfall. I didn't confirm or deny her suspicions. Instead, I asked her why she thought I would do something like that. She reminded me that I was her son, that I'd been raised to be better than petty revenge. She told me that my sister was suffering, that she'd lost everything that mattered to her, and that family should stick together even when they disagreed. I listened quietly, then asked her a simple question. Where was this concern for family loyalty when she liked my sister's message telling me not to come to the wedding? Where was this belief in sticking together when they both decided I was an embarrassment to the family? She tried to explain that they'd been emotional, that weddings were stressful times, that they hadn't really meant to exclude me permanently. She insisted that I was taking things too seriously and that my response was disproportionate to their actions. I told her that I'd learned something important about proportional responses from watching how she and my sister had treated my girlfriend and me. They decided that our relationship was unacceptable based on superficial judgments, and they'd made their feelings known through consistent cruelty and exclusion. I'd simply applied the same logic to their behavior toward me. She left without saying goodbye. Update 3. 2 weeks later, the full scope of the damage became clear. My sister had been forced to move back in with our parents. Her professional reputation in the local marketing community was damaged, and most of her friend group had chosen sides in the affair revelation. The maid of honor's divorce proceedings were ugly and public, and my sister's name was being mentioned frequently in social media posts about betrayal and friendship. The financial impact was devastating too. The wedding vendors had kept their deposits. The honeymoon bookings couldn't be canceled without significant penalties, and her sudden unemployment meant she couldn't cover her portion of their shared expenses. My $5,000 withdrawal had been the final straw, leaving them unable to pay for the trip they'd planned as a way to work through their relationship problems. I learned these details not from direct family communication, but through my cousin, who seemed to be serving as an unofficial family newsletter, keeping everyone informed about the ongoing drama. The most interesting development was how the family dynamics had shifted. Several relatives who'd witnessed my sister's behavior at that final dinner were now quietly reaching out to me, expressing their discomfort with how I'd been treated. They weren't explicitly supporting what they suspected I'd done, but they were acknowledging that my sister's actions had consequences beyond just hurting my feelings. My uncle, who'd always been the family peacemaker, called to suggest that maybe everyone needed to take a step back and examine their own behavior in this situation. He didn't say it directly, but I could tell he thought my sister had brought her troubles on herself. 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, my sister showed up at my apartment again. This time she wasn't crying or desperate, she was angry. She told me she knew I was behind everything that had happened to her. She'd figured out the timing, recognized the methodical way each disaster had unfolded, and realized that only I had access to the information that had been used against her. I asked her what she wanted me to say. She demanded that I admit what I'd done and help her fix the damage. She wanted me to contact her former employer and explain that the anonymous email had been false, to somehow reach out to the maid of honor and convince her that the affair evidence had been fabricated. I told her that would be difficult since I'd have to admit to sending anonymous emails, which would probably create more problems than it solved. She stared at me for a long moment, realizing that I wasn't denying her accusations. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Why? I explained that she'd taught me an important lesson about family relationships. She'd shown me that blood connections don't protect you from being discarded when you become inconvenient. She'd demonstrated that love is conditional, that acceptance can be withdrawn when someone doesn't meet your standards, and that years of loyalty can be erased by a single disagreement. I told her that I'd simply applied her own logic to our situation. If she could decide I was unworthy of being part of her important moments based on my choice of girlfriend, then I could decide she was unworthy of having those moments protected from the consequences of her own choices. She left without another word. A month later, I heard that my sister had found a new job in another city and was planning to relocate. The local social and professional networks had become too complicated for her to navigate successfully. She was essentially starting over, which seemed appropriate given how thoroughly she'd burned her bridges. My mother and I hadn't spoken since her visit to my apartment. The rest of the family had split into factions, those who thought I'd gone too far, those who thought my sister had deserved what happened to her, and those who preferred to stay out of the drama entirely. My girlfriend and I were still together, stronger actually for having weathered the family storm together. She'd never asked me directly if I was responsible for my sister's troubles, but she'd made it clear that she understood why someone might feel compelled to respond to cruelty with consequences. Looking back, I don't feel guilty about what I did. My sister had made choices, to have an affair, to misuse company resources, to treat me and my girlfriend with contempt, and to exclude me from her wedding with a cruel message that my mother endorsed. I hadn't created any of those problems. I'd simply ensured that the natural consequences of her actions caught up with her at the most inconvenient possible time. The wedding videographer they'd hired as my replacement had kept their deposit even though the ceremony was canceled. The money I'd contributed to their honeymoon was back in my account, earning interest. And my sister had learned that actions have consequences, even when you think you're powerful enough to avoid them. Sometimes karma needs a little help with timing. I was happy to provide that assistance. 6 months later, I'm living my life exactly as I choose, dating someone who makes me happy, and maintaining relationships only with family members who treat me with basic respect. My sister's attempt to control who belonged in her perfect wedding photos had backfired spectacularly, but she'd gotten what she wanted in the end. I wasn't in any of her wedding memories, because there weren't any wedding memories to be in.